Hey everyone, Jeff here from Films at Home, and today I'm going to give you my favorite movie from each year that I've been alive on this planet. Today's a little bit of a different video. We're not going to talk physical media, we're just going to talk movies, which is really, at the end of the day, what we all love. That's why we do this. So, what I'm doing today was inspired by another video from a YouTube channel called Have You Seen? And they reached out to me on Twitter, and I don't know if other people have done this before or if they were the first to do it, but they reached out with this idea and they shared their video. I watched it. I thought it was a super cool way to break down some of your favorite movies and give recommendations and just talk movies. And basically it was take a movie, your favorite movie from each year that you've been alive on this earth from the year you were born all the way up to 2022. Thought it was super cool. I told them I'd love to participate. So here we are, and I'm going to break it down starting in 1992, the year I was born. Yes, just turned 30 last year. A lot of you guys think I'm older than that. I don't know if it's the beard. I don't know if it's just I'm super tired from being a dad and I look older. I don't know what it is, but I just turned 30. So we've got 30 years of movies to cover here, and I'll pick one from each year starting in 1992 going all the way up to 2022. I did not pick one for 2023. We're only a few months into the year and I don't have a favorite yet. So we're going to go right up to 2022, and maybe in a few years I'll update this video. But here are 30 of my favorite movies starting in 1992 for each year that I've been alive. So starting with 1992, there were a lot of contenders for this year, and I'll say a lot of strong contenders for every year on this list. The 90s and early 2000s and the last few years, it's been a great time for movies. But for 1992, I had to pick Reservoir Dogs by my guy Quentin Tarantino. His first feature-length movie has an amazing story that he wrote, really, broke him out onto the scene, which led to greats like Pulp Fiction a few years later, and of course, the rest of his awesome filmography, all of which I love and enjoy very much. But Reservoir Dogs in 1992, I just put it head and shoulders above anything else. I think it's such a unique movie. I think the writing and the style in it and the dialogue was something that really, no one had done before. Now everyone tries to emulate Tarantino, but at that time, that was very unique, just the long, drawn-out dialogue sequences and the character development. So I just love the movie. It's still a classic. It just had an incredible 4K release and a steelbook that came out last year. So if you want some physical media, you can buy it on 4K Blu-ray. It's also widely available on pretty much every platform, but Reservoir Dogs is my pick for 1992 and is still probably in my top 3 Tarantino movies, along with Django Unchained and probably Kill Bill. Now for 1993, I had to pick Jurassic Park. Now this movie was one of the biggest movies of my childhood, so there were other great movies on the list, but I love Jurassic Park and I love its rewatchability, and that's one of the things when I thought about this list that I made sure to cover. These are movies that I love and I enjoy and I rewatch over and over and over again and get the same enjoyment out of them every time, and Jurassic Park is definitely that. I was big into dinosaurs as a kid. Jurassic Park was a huge reason for that. Did I watch it too young? I don't know. Who really cares? It didn't affect me. It just made my love for dinosaurs even stronger. And I know most kids love dinosaurs, but Jurassic Park, and it's so incredible. The practical effects, the sound design, the set design, the characters in the movie, everything about it was just revolutionary when it came out. And it's incredible to think that Spielberg made that and Schindler's List in the same year. What a complete opposite side of the spectrum thinking that must have been. But Jurassic Park remains one of the greatest movies of all time, and I fully believe that. It's super entertaining even today. It holds up, the effects are incredible, and it is just one of the best popcorn blockbuster, just best movies that you can watch. Now for 1994, there were a ton of movies again, but I picked a more recent favorite that I've discovered just within the last couple of years, and that is In the Mouth of Madness. John Carpenter movie starring Sam Neill from Jurassic Park, coincidentally enough, and John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness I think is super underrated in his filmography. Everybody thinks about, The Thing and Halloween and Escape from New York and, They Live, The Fog. These are the ones that people think of. But In the Mouth of Madness was probably the last great movie that he made, because there wasn't much after that. It was sort of in this weird tail end of his career. He had some kind of odd movies in the 90s, early 2000s, and that was the last great movie that I think he made. And when I first watched it with the Scream Factory Blu-ray release a couple of years back, it just immediately hooked me. So that was an easy pick for me in 1994 in what was a loaded year of movies. I can't recommend In the Mouth of Madness more. If you like that sort of thing, you're going to love that movie. Now, for 1995, I went with one of my favorite all time directors, and that is David Fincher and his movie Seven. I watched this for the first time when I was probably 15 or 16 on a DVD in my bedroom, and never having seen it before, it was this perfect mix of horror, thriller, detective movie. It's M. Night Shyamalan mixed with some James Wan mixed with the twist. It's just such a perfect culmination of different styles that all rolled together. And there's some horrific moments, and there's some great detective moments, and of course, I think at this point we all know the ending, which is one of the most famous endings in movie history. But Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman in that movie are just incredible. Kevin Spacey, he's incredible in it. I know, very problematic now for sure, but doesn't take away from the fact that it's an incredible movie with incredible performances. And David Fincher, I think that was probably the first Fincher movie that I watched, and it won't be the last one on this list from him, but that's the one that really sold me on him and his style. And that movie is so rewatchable today, even with, knowing the ending. The first time you watch it, it's a mind blower, but it's still really great after each subsequent viewing. Now, for 1996, I picked another one from my childhood that was a big deal for me. One of the biggest blockbusters of all time, Independence Day. Loved, loved, loved this movie. Watched it, I don't know, dozens and dozens and dozens of times. The effects in it are super cool. The whole storyline, like, I was sort of fascinated with aliens and like the paranormal type stuff when I was younger, and still am to a certain degree. I think that comes with sort of being a horror movie fan. You get interested in that stuff, and I just the whole idea of like this alien invasion and the Bill Pullman speech and the fight back at the end to take back Earth, and crazy Randy Quaid and Will Smith punching an alien, and Jeff Goldblum being all sorts of weird, and Area 51. And I mean, it just has so much. It was just such a perfect summer blockbuster movie that is instantly it became a classic, and is so easily rewatchable. It's one of the best movies to watch on, say, the 4th of July each year to kick off summer. It's just a ton of fun, and I think it's one of those classics that will live forever. So for 1997, we're going back to Fincher with one of his lesser known movies, The Game. Now, this one stands out to me because it was the first Criterion Collection Blu-ray I ever bought, was The Game. Had no idea what the Criterion Collection was. All I knew was that I had watched The Game on a DVD that my dad had. I watched it after I watched Seven because I was immediately, just sucked in by what Fincher could do. And that movie almost blew me away more than Seven did, because it was so twisty, and it was such a good thriller, and it was just a total like mind bend, mind fuck of a movie that I just fell in love with it. And it holds a special place for me because it was my first Criterion and one of the first Blu-rays I ever bought. I had no idea, I just wanted to go out and get it. But if you haven't seen that movie, you need to go watch it if you like Fincher, if you like thrillers. It's very stylistic 90s, but it's got such a great cast, great performances, an excellent story. And, rewatchability wise, the second, third time through, that now that you know the story, it's not as impactful, but it's still a great movie through and through. And definitely, if you haven't seen this one at all, that first time watch, I think, will have you with your jaw on the floor. It's really that good. Now, for 1998, I had to pick another childhood classic, and that was Small Soldiers. Now, when this came out, I'm 6 years old, right? Small Soldiers was a massive deal. I had all the figures. I had the PC game. We had all the video games. We had the movie on VHS. We watched it till that tape broke. I mean, we watched that constantly, my brothers and I, and it's such a fun movie. And it's a little more serious than I think you'd probably expect, but it has an amazing voice cast. I mean, it's essentially like the Dirty Dozen, but with this incredible cast of voices. Awesome action scenes. I mean, this comes out right like a couple years after Toy Story, which I also loved, but it's sort of like the anti-Toy Story. It's action figures coming to life and fighting literal war against each other, blowing houses up, like literally attacking and assaulting people, killing each other, blowing each other up. I mean, it was like this crazy movie, like nothing I had ever seen before. And I was so happy a few years back when it finally got a Blu-ray release, because I think it's an underappreciated 1990s childhood classic for lots of us that doesn't get talked about as much as some other movies from that time period, but definitely deserves it. Now, for 1999, I had to pick The Blair Witch Project because this movie changed horror movies forever. It wasn't the first found footage movie, it wasn't even close to being the first, but it was the one that changed the game. And this movie scared the hell out of me as a kid. It still scares me today. Yeah, you know the ending, but it does have rewatchability because every time you watch it, you can sort of pick up on different things that you might have missed because the camera is going so crazy. And there's also these awesome like fan theories out there about, is there actually a witch, or are the guys just out to kill the girl and they're just messing with her out in the woods? And, is there something more to this? Is this actually a little more sinister than even there being a witch? Is this some sort of like almost like weird snuff film that was found and these guys murdered this girl? And like in the age of the internet too, like all that stuff becomes even scarier to a certain degree. And like at the time, that movie was groundbreaking, just changed the game completely, and just paved the way for everything we get now, from Paranormal Activity to even everything Blumhouse does. Wouldn't have happened without Blair Witch and that low budget horror success. It's just such a great piece of filmmaking. Now, for the year 2000, I've got Christopher Nolan and probably his most underappreciated movie, which is Memento. This has a great performance by Guy Pearce, and he is just incredible in the movie because the movie basically plays backwards to a certain degree. Like you sort of watch it from back to front, which is really different than what you're used to, but it's because he has this short-term memory loss and everything's written on post-it notes and he's just forgetting every 15 minutes what happened to him. And so you as a viewer, you don't have any context as to what's happening in the movie because you're going along with this guy who can't remember anything past 5-10 minutes ago. So it takes you on this real trip. It is a great movie. It does have, again, rewatchability because once you know the story and you watch it the first time, then you can go back and you start to see things unfold. You start to understand it better. It's honestly a movie you probably have to watch 2 or 3 times to fully grasp and understand, but it's a great example of like early Christopher Nolan that doesn't get nearly as much attention as Inception, Interstellar, The Dark Knight. Like it doesn't get nearly as much attention as those, but you could see where he was heading. It's probably his closest movie to Tenet. It's not nearly as big a scale as Tenet was, but if you were confused by Tenet, you may not like Memento, but Memento is actually a little bit easier to figure out. I'm still confused by Tenet. So it was really, really interesting piece of filmmaking. Now, 2001 was an easy one for me, and it's Training Day. I love Denzel Washington. Ethan Hawke is incredible in this. We got Snoop Dogg, we got Dr. Dre, we got all this West Coast hip-hop, rap, music. The setting is incredible. So many iconic scenes. Denzel Washington is just off the charts good in this. He deserved the Oscar for it. Well-deserved Oscar win. And it was also the first Blu-ray I ever bought, and it was probably like the first ever like R-rated movie I watched was Training Day, and I just fell in love with all of it. And, this is, I'm probably, 14 years old, 13 years old. Like, I'm finally starting to watch some of this, R-rated stuff. And that was one of the first. And I just remember going, oh, so, like, movies are way more serious than Independence Day. And, like, as much as I love that PG-13 big blockbuster stuff, I was like, whoa, there's levels to this. And this took me to the next level. So, love Training Day. It always holds a special place in my heart for being the first Blu-ray I ever bought that I made sure to go out when I got my Blu-ray player, number one. And it's just an awesome movie. I still have the poster hanging up in my room that I've had literally for 15 years at this point. Love the movie. And if you haven't seen it yet, check out the new 4K release because it was fantastic. Now, 2002, I had to pick Spider-Man. That first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie changed the game for comic book movies the way that Blair Witch changed horror. It just shifted everything. Nobody had made a comic book movie like that. Like, we had the Batman movies, but they weren't Spider-Man. Nobody had ever done Marvel as well as Sam Raimi did with that first Spider-Man movie, and that movie was a phenomenon. There were games, there was merchandise, there were toys. I still, up at my parents', they have a house up in Maine. We were there this weekend. My son, they found Spider-Man and Green Goblin toys that I had from when I was a kid that he's now playing with. And something about Spider-Man is so instantly recognizable to kids and to everybody. Like I said, hey, go get Spider-Man, a character who he's never seen before. And after a couple of times, he's like, oh, this is Spider-Man. He's super cool. Like there's just something about Spider-Man. He's always been my favorite Marvel character by a mile. And that 2002 Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie just changed the entire landscape of what was possible for comic book movies and opened up, basically 20 years plus now of this incredible Marvel cinematic universe, none of which I think could exist without Sony taking that chance on Spider-Man and then the equally great Spider-Man 2 a few years later. Now for 2003, there were a ton of picks here. I had a hard time with this year in particular, but I went with a local favorite, and that's Mystic River. This movie I haven't watched since I had kids, and it's probably much harder to watch since then, but it's such a great Boston crime drama, and I am drawn to things from my area, from where I grew up, from areas that I'm used to. That's why I love New England folk horror. That's why you'll see there's a couple Boston movies on this list. I love sort of just that area, that location. I love being, in that world. And Sean Penn and Kevin Bacon in this, absolutely incredible performances. It's a great story. It just, when I first saw it, I was like, wow, like one of the better crime dramas out there, and a super serious one that's definitely not like a, hey, let's pop some popcorn and have a fun Friday night. Not a fun movie, but an important movie with just some incredible dramatic performances from the cast that I think everybody should watch. And if you're from the area, you'll recognize a lot of it. It was shot around in the Boston area. There's tons of monuments and things that you'll notice in the movie, which makes it cool as well. But just a really tough watch, but one that everyone should probably check out. Now, 2004, I went back to Denzel for one of my favorite movies of his, probably number 2 after Training Day, and that is Man on Fire. Man on Fire was like, it was like John Wick before John Wick, like The Equalizer before The Equalizer. It was just Denzel Washington just going one-man army to save this little girl, Dakota Fanning. And it's Tony Scott. It's super stylistic. It has a ton of like very interesting visuals, incredible action sequences, everything you'd expect from a Tony Scott movie. And Denzel just kicks ass throughout the whole movie, which is always so much fun. I do love John Wick. I do love The Equalizer. I do love that kind of movie. I love Taken with Liam Neeson. Like, it's that kind of movie, but it's almost like it's a little bit more serious. It's a little bit elevated, but it has that real early 2000s style to it, which is like, I think of like Bad Boys and like things from that time period. It's very stylistically 2000s, but it's such a great movie, and you got to check out Denzel. Now for 2005, I went with Sin City because that is a super cool comic book movie. If you don't like Sin City, I don't know what to tell you. And the sequels, whatever, but that original Sin City is one of the coolest looking movies. It has such interesting characters, an incredible cast. It's sort of broken down into different stories, almost like a Pulp Fiction. Like they all sort of tie in together, but they're broken into different pieces. The coloring on it, it's black and white, it's noir, but it also has these kind of striking color moments. It's beautifully done, beautifully directed, great performance. It was like nothing that honestly had ever been seen on screen before, in my opinion. It was completely new and revolutionary, and it has incredible rewatchability factor because it is a movie that over and over and over again you can enjoy. You can just shut your brain off, enjoy that movie, and have a great time with it. But Sin City, if you haven't read the graphic novel, maybe do that first, read it afterward, but it's one of the best graphic novel comic adaptations of all time. Now for 2006, I picked Children of Men, which was another movie that I watched very early on as a kid in my sort of R-rated movie watching in my like late teens, early 20s. As I was just sort of discovering movies. And I mean, first of all, it has probably the best one take sequence in all movie history. Just an incredible single take scene. And it's directed by Alfonso Cuarón, who is incredible. Clive Owen's in this, who gives an amazing performance as the lead. And it's also one of the more realistic, like, it's not necessarily post-apocalyptic, like you're sort of in the middle of the apocalypse. Essentially, the story is that people can't have kids anymore. And when the world finds out that people aren't getting pregnant and people are basically sterile and there isn't going to be another generation, the world falls apart. But then, they find a pregnant woman. Everything that follows is a result of that. But it's this super interesting look at like a realistic future. A kid hadn't been born in something like, I forget exactly, but a decade or something since the last child was born. I mean, that's a terrifying apocalyptic future that isn't covered as much as, aliens and monsters and plague and zombies and all that stuff and nuclear war. This was a really interesting take on that, and I just highly recommend this movie to anybody. It's dark, but it's so well done. For 2007, I picked There Will Be Blood. I actually only watched this for the first time a few years ago, and I immediately realized why Daniel Day-Lewis gets so much praise. I knew him from Gangs of New York. I knew him from Lincoln. I knew him from a few other things, but when I watched him in There Will Be Blood and some of the monologues in this, and Paul Dano as well playing, against him, this was like a breakout for Paul Dano. It's just an incredible movie. It has a really great snapshot of a time in American history, which is super unique. Like, it's honestly not a time period or a world that's covered that much in movies, which is a really neat look at this, small slice of American history. But the performances are great. The writing is incredible. It's a long movie, but it doesn't feel that long. It spans decades, and it has one of the great monologues and one of the great lines in movie history. I drink your milkshake is just, that whole moment is incredible, and it's a dreary kind of sad. It's not an uplifting movie, but it's a very realistic, gritty movie, and I think, as you can tell by my list, those are the kind of things I enjoy. Now, for 2008. This was a no-brainer. I was 16 years old. The Dark Knight came out. Heath Ledger, the Joker, Christopher Nolan, who at the time I really didn't even know when I was 16. But The Dark Knight changed everything. Heath Ledger gives the best comic book movie performance of all time as the Joker. Deserved every last bit of that Oscar. I only wish he had been alive to enjoy it and potentially continue that trilogy as the Joker, because I think they had plans for him. But it is so iconic because of his unfortunate death, but that doesn't take away with how great the rest of the movie is. There are incredible IMAX moments, and Christian Bale kills it. I think it's his best Batman is this movie, his best Bruce Wayne, his best Batman. They blow up a hospital, they rob a bank, they're hanging from buildings, they're jumping out of airplanes. It's just everything Christopher Nolan with a budget wanted to do. It's everything Batman should be, can be, and the Joker and that whole storyline. He's just one of the best movie villains of all time. I personally love Batman. He's my favorite comic book hero on the DC side. Spider-Man's my Marvel guy, but Batman's got my DC heart. And this movie, what more could be said? It's just probably still the greatest comic book movie ever made. Now, for 2009, I'm going with a smaller movie which has gained some traction and had a big hit when it came out, but I think it's sort of underappreciated now, is District 9. And that's Neil Blomkamp, who has now suffered and hasn't had a bunch of great success recently, but District 9 was his first feature film. And that storyline, this story about apartheid in South Africa, but by using an alien community and an alien invasion, making it very sci-fi, making it Halo-esque at the time. Halo 3 was the game. Everybody was playing Halo 3. So that whole aesthetic, it was super cool. I totally understand why they wanted him to do live action Halo movies after District 9, because the CGI was actually really good. The practical effects were great. A very cool sci-fi story that I think everybody can get behind, and then all of this sort of cultural commentary underneath it, which maybe on your first watch you don't recognize, but on your second, third watch you start to see some of those themes. And I think I've seen it on TikTok a few times, people posting clips. I think it's interesting. It's almost finding a new audience now, which is what's crazy about TikTok, is they can make an old song or an old movie super popular because kids just don't see these movies anymore, and they see them on TikTok and then go watch them. But District 9 is a great movie, one of the better sci-fi movies of the last 20 years that everyone should go watch. Now, for 2010, we're shipping back up to Boston. I've got The Town. This movie honestly makes my list for one scene in particular, and that's the fact that they rob Fenway Park. Now, as a Boston guy, Charlestown, we all knew, bank robbers, right? It was a rough town. They're great people, but They had their moments. They were robbing banks. That happened. That was the town. That was what happened there. It was a rough and tumble area. Now it's like a yuppie area and everything costs $10 million to live there. But that's not how it used to be. In this movie, Jeremy Renner, this was the first movie I saw him really stand out in. He's incredible in this and does a great Boston accent. Ben Affleck, of course, as always, great in these roles. It has a nice supporting cast as well. John Hamm's in it. Blake Lively's in it. And the scene, like, there's some awesome dialogue. There's some really incredible moments. But, I mean, they spend like 30 minutes of the movie literally going through and pulling off a robbery in Fenway Park, having a shootout in Fenway Park, like where you walk to get your beers and go into the game. They're having a shootout in this movie. It's just one of the coolest like movie settings ever, that they're inside this iconic baseball field that I love so much. And there's just this amazing movie like right on, Lansdowne Street in Fenway Park. It's happening right here. Such a cool scene. Had to make my list for that alone. But it's also a great movie on top of all of that. It's really, really well done. Now, for 2011, I don't have a ton of comedies on this list, but honestly, 2011, the one that stands out to me is Bridesmaids. I think it's just one of the best comedies that's ever been made. It is infinitely rewatchable. I still catch it on TV and it makes me laugh. The cast at the time, they weren't huge names. They had been on SNL, but somebody like Melissa McCarthy got a break out there. Kristen Wiig, Maya Rudolph, Rose Byrne. Like it was such a great cast, and just the comedy in it is sort of timeless, which isn't always the case. Like I recently rewatched The Hangover, and while I still laugh quite a bit, there's a lot of stuff in there that is not going to age well. And I think that Bridesmaids will age well, and it has. And over the last 10, 12 years, it still remains a classic. It's wonderfully written. The comedy is sharp. It's quick. It's fast. It is, just an instantly enjoyable, rewatchable movie that you can put on again and again and again and get laughs out of every time. And it's also got, just a likable group of people involved with it. So I love that movie. It's just a ton of fun, and it had to make the list. Now for 2012, I picked what I think is the best James Bond movie ever, and that is Skyfall. And maybe I'm a little biased because I was 21 when this came out, 2012. This movie was just a blast. I saw it in IMAX, which was also super cool, and like proper IMAX. Like if you're from New England, Jordan's Furniture Theater IMAX, like floor to ceiling. You're standing there and you have to move your head to see it IMAX. Like it was serious IMAX, not what you get at like AMC. And it blew me away. Just that IMAX experience stands out to me. But that movie is also just so well crafted, and it has an awesome song. It has an awesome villain. It's Daniel Craig at his best as Bond. It's sort of right in the middle of his run of movies, which I think was the sweet spot for him and the character and the storyline. And that movie just, again, is the greatest Bond movie, in my opinion. It's definitely Daniel Craig's best, and it is so rewatchable because of that. Like, Bond movies are always great, but there's the iconic opening. There's multiple iconic scenes in Skyfall that would have you coming back to it again and again. And it's just a little bit long, but such a fun movie to watch. Now, for 2013, I picked probably what is one of my top 5 movies of all time, and that's Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners. Now, Prisoners, not a lot of people used to talk about this movie, and now gets more traction, hopefully because I'm one who's always talking about it online, but it's a top 5 movie for me. Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal are unreal. The direction in this movie is unreal. Paul Dano, Melissa Leo, incredible in their roles. It is, I saw this in the theaters, and it was not a big box office hit. It came out in like September, and I walked out of that movie and I said, if this movie doesn't win all of the acting awards and the directing awards, I don't know what's wrong. And it didn't get nominated for anything. And I think it's the biggest shame. Some of the best, most dramatic, disturbing, gritty performances you could ask for. Not an easy subject, much like Mystic River. We're talking missing kids here, killed kids, murdered kids. Haven't watched it since I've been a parent, but I'd like to see how it emotionally affects me even more now. But it's just Denis Villeneuve at his best, at his absolute best. And this, I think, this launched him into the next step. This was his first like American movie. He had made a French movie previously, but God, this movie is just, it's a hard watch, and it is brutal and gory and disturbing. and scary, but what an experience. For 2014, I went back with some horror and I went to It Follows, which I think is just one of the great horror movies of all time and certainly one of the best of the last decade. That movie is just super inventive in the way that it does the, I guess, slasher genre. It's basically, it is like a slasher, but it's more a slasher in the sense of like Nightmare on Elm Street. Like you've got sort of this fictional, like dream character almost who the rest of the world can't see but is hunting you down, coming to kill you. You can't escape it. You can fall asleep but you can't run from it. It's that sort of, that question that gets asked is like, well, if you had a snail that was following you around for your entire life and if it touched you, you died. Like, where would you go and what would you do to make sure you never got touched and how would you live your life? And it's like, it's that. But the thought of that is so terrifying. There's multiple great jump scares in this. The storyline is pretty solid, but it was so different from anything I had ever seen. The way that this horror movie in this sort of like semi slasher, the way they handled the characters, I just thought it was just one of the most inventive horror movies to date. And I think everyone should check it out, even if you're not a horror movie fan. It is horror, but it's not gonna like scare you shitless. You're gonna have a good time with that movie, and it's everyone deserves to watch it because it's that good. For 2015, we're going big blockbusters again. I do love a big blockbuster, and this one's Mad Max Fury Road. George Miller is a madman, and Tom Hardy is a madman, and Charlize Theron is awesome, and Immortan Joe and his whole cast of crew and characters. Nicholas Hoult is incredible. I mean, the cast is great, and they barely even have any dialogue. Like Tom Hardy says like 12 lines throughout the movie, but the action, the nonstop, the cars, the guitar player up on the the big rig swinging back and forth with flames coming out, massive speakers. We got things exploding. We got them running through a sandstorm. We got them running through bombs going off and trains of these just gas filled like apocalyptic machines, and the whole sort of like storyline and the whole lore and everything of Mad Max and Immortan Joe and how that all worked, and the blood bags. Like George Miller's just a madman. But that movie, again, one that I saw in theaters and had just an unreal experience. Like in the first 10 minutes, I was like, I've never seen anything like this. This is the most like insane, manic, incredible action movie that I've ever seen. And I was instantly hooked. And then it only went up from there. Cannot wait to see what they do with Furiosa. But Mad Max Fury Road was just next level stuff. And it is still one of the most rewatchable movies. It's quick too, like it gets to the point and it just gives you nonstop action. That's what's so great about it. So for 2016, I went with Arrival. Denis Villeneuve again, one of my favorite directors, up there with David Fincher, and Tarantino and Christopher Nolan. I love Denis Villeneuve, but Arrival just was, like nothing I'd ever seen. It was alien invasion. It was, that alien story, but it's almost like it's like part Alex Garland. It's like part, who did Ex Machina and Annihilation. It's like part Independence Day, but it's also the super, the way that the aliens are portrayed is like how I don't think people can wrap their heads around that, but like that's probably what's out there. Like if there are life forms out there, are they going to look just like us and act like us and have two arms and two legs and go blah, 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 like Mars Attacks? Like, no, they're probably going to be some like different life form that communicates totally differently, that may not even be like solid. Like, we don't know. That's the crazy thing. And it was just a super cool interpretation of that. And then there's the whole like sort of family drama side of it too, which reminded me a little bit of like Contact and movies like that. I do love a good alien movie, and Arrival, if you haven't seen it yet, it's a bit of a slow draw, but it's worth every minute. Now for 2017, I went with Good Time, which is sort of where I first gained a ton of respect for Robert Pattinson, and he has just continued to impress me ever since with The Lighthouse and The Batman. I mean, he's been an incredible actor, but Good Time was where I was like, oh, the kid from Twilight, he can act. And that's a Safdie brothers movie. If you haven't seen it, it's very much like their other movies. It's set in the city, it's set in New York. It's, again, very manic, anxiety-inducing, fast-paced. Some questionable stuff happens in it. You don't know if you like the main character. Are you rooting for them? Are you rooting against them? It's very much like Uncut Gems in that way. but this sets the stage. Like, that's a great double feature, is to watch Good Time and then to watch Uncut Gems. But I think this was one of A24's early sleeper hits that didn't get nearly as much attention as Uncut Gems, but Good Time, if you enjoyed Uncut Gems and it didn't make you super uncomfortable, check out Good Time. Robert Pattinson's just unreal in it. Benny Safdie actually stars in it as well. Incredible story, excellent filmmaking, all around a great film that is quick, to the point, action-packed, tackles some serious subject matter, but is just a really fascinating movie. For 2018, I had to go with another one that's in my top 5 movies of all time, and that is Hereditary. This was my introduction to Ari Aster. This was my introduction really to like A24 horror, in that sort of slow burn horror, which now I've come to love. This was the first movie like that, and I just remember I saw the first trailer and I was like, okay, I'm all in. Loved the trailer. Trailer was a great piece of marketing. So I was there opening night, and it was one of the best theater experiences that I ever had. The audience was just, at one point in the movie, no spoilers because it's fairly recent if you haven't seen it, but complete silence. I've never heard a theater so quiet. And then I've never heard a theater be so quiet, but also kind of be silently screaming at the same time towards the end of the movie, and then audible gasps and audible yells and screams. And these weren't just like teenage kids, being obnoxious and, look, the killer. It wasn't like that. These were all adults who were genuinely shocked and disturbed and like, what the hell am I watching? And I haven't had an experience like that again, but I love that movie. I love everything about it. I love the way it was put together. I love the story. I know some people say they think it's garbage. It's hit or miss for a lot of people, but I still find it to be insanely terrifying. Toni Collette should have won every award for her performance in that. That is the reason I stopped watching and caring about the Oscars so much, was when she didn't get nominated, because I realized this is just a popularity contest. Because if she wasn't nominated, never mind won Best Actress that year, there's no reason anybody else should have. She should have swept every award. Her performance is off the rails incredible. But Hereditary, Ari Aster, he's now gone on to do Midsommar. He's done Beau is Afraid. He does weird stuff. It's a weird movie, but of those three, from what I've heard about Beau is Afraid, it's still probably his most easily accessible for the mainstream. So go give it a watch if you haven't yet. Turn the lights off, shut them all off, turn your brain off for a second, and just enjoy it, because it's going to take you to another dimension. Now for 2019, I took Dr. Sleep because more people need to talk about this movie. This was one of the best adaptations of a book that I've ever seen, horror or otherwise. Mike Flanagan was tasked with this almost impossible task of the fact that he needed to adapt a movie from a book, which was a sequel to another book, which had a movie which did not follow the book, but was hugely popular. So he needed to make a sequel to The Shining, the book, and The Shining, the movie, and make it Dr. Sleep, the movie, and have it all make sense. And somehow he did it, because he's a mastermind. Mike Flanagan is just a master of horror. Like, he is this generation's, John Carpenter, like, master of horror. He's that guy. Nails it. But it's so faithful to the book, but also ties in those elements from the movie. I mean, just that balancing act is so hard to do. It's hard enough to do a book adaptation, never mind when you have one of the most classic movies of all time looming over you, and you're the sequel to that movie, 40 years later. Incredible job. Great performances throughout. Really spooky, really scary, great atmospheric horror. Tells a great story and is a worthy follow-up to both The Shining, the book, and The Shining, the movie, which makes it a 2-for-1 deal. No matter which one you liked better, the book or the movie, you're going to get something great from Dr. Sleep. So for 2020, this one's a weird year, right? Not a lot of stuff came out. 2021 kind of the same way. Didn't get a lot of theatrical releases. Not a lot was released. But one movie that came out in 2020, it went to Shudder Originals, and then it came out on Blu-ray, was The Dark and the Wicked. I like this movie because it's very atmospheric, like Hereditary. It plays with family drama and family dynamics, and it deals with grief and loss. And those things, to me, are super important, because that's sort of how I deal with them, is by watching horror movies and sort of, internally processing my own grief and loss and whatever, depressive states that you can get into with the world. And you process them in movies like this. And The Dark and the Wicked definitely doesn't get enough attention. It's talked about in some horror circles, but if you haven't seen it, it's slow burn. It's not going to be super fast paced, but it has terrifying sequences, a really interesting story. It's low budget but effective, and that's what I love my horror to be. So if you haven't seen that, you can buy the Blu-ray. It's still available on Shudder, and the whole team behind that deserves all the credit in the world. It got put out in the middle of a pandemic, and I think just missed by a lot of people, but it needs to be seen, and it deserves to have more eyes on it. Now for 2021, like I said, again, not a ton of theatrical releases this year, right? Because everything was still very pandemic. It was still COVID. Theaters were not open everywhere. They were limited capacity. Quiet Place Part 2 came out. There were a couple big movies, but the one that stands out the most to me is The Summer of Soul, which is a documentary by Questlove. And love Questlove. Awesome guy, makes awesome music. But his documentary was so interesting because I saw this one in theaters. I saw this in Martha's Vineyard. I was there over the summer of 2021 for a little getaway after we'd been locked up for a year and a half, right before we had my son. And the Martha's Vineyard little theater was playing it, and it sold out. July in Martha's Vineyard, a lot of people there, but it sold out. Whole theater was sold out. And I was in there with a lot of older people, not a lot of young people in Martha's Vineyard. This is a lot of 50, 60, 70 plus crowd, retirees, and they were rocking. This movie's this celebration of this Harlem music festival, which happened, I think it was the same year as Woodstock. But you know how many movies we get about Woodstock and all the documentaries and all the footage that's out there? Nobody talks about this Harlem music festival. And it had such incredible talents at it. There's a scene where it's not a scene, it was a documentary, but there's a whole section of young Stevie Wonder, like super young Stevie Wonder, just killing it on stage. And there's so many great soul acts and so many great blues acts in this. And it pieces it all together in this awesome story that talks about that time period too, and civil rights and race relations and what was going on with, police in the area, and, why this wasn't covered as big as Woodstock and all of this stuff. But the musical performances in this are just top notch. The storytelling is top notch. They find people who were there as, attendees, as fans, and they interview them. And these people have such a glow in their eye talking about it. And it's seriously all this lost footage that just didn't exist. Like, nobody knew where it was, and it got discovered, and they remastered it all and put it all out there, pieced together this documentary, and it won Best Documentary Feature at the Oscars, and it deserved that statue, and so did Questlove. He did a great job resurfacing this super important cultural moment that basically nobody outside of Harlem had ever heard of, which is why movies and documentaries are so great. And now to round out my list for 2022, there were some good movies in 2022. I could have picked The Batman, but I already put The Dark Knight on this list, and I think I like The Dark Knight better, so I had to go with Top Gun Maverick. Rewatchability? Insane. That movie is a technical marvel. The stuff that they did in that movie just still blows me away. The shots, the fact that they were in the planes, like they were actually shooting in these fighter jets. The IMAX sequences are off the scale, ridiculously cool. Even the opening with Tom Cruise just like breaking that sound barrier and that Lockheed Martin like Blackbird like undercover jet, whatever they were testing. Such a cool moment, so futuristic and just so Tom Cruise and just over the top crazy, and everything he does in the movie. I mean, the flying and the fact that, a lot of them did some of this flying themselves and they were actually in those planes. Like, they're not on a sound set. They attached cameras to these F-16s and flew them around, and the actors were really going through 7G, 5G, whatever it is, training. Like, they were going through all this gravity training and putting their bodies to the limit. And, Tom Cruise is a madman doing this stuff and all these stunts. But the movie's just also super cool and ties up all these loose ends with Val Kilmer and his character, and Miles Teller, coming back to play Rooster's kid, and that relationship with Tom Cruise. And then, it gets sort of a little off the rails at the end. I would say it goes from like Top Gun to like Top Gun Mission Impossible in the last 20 minutes or so. But even that's super cool. And so they steal a plane. Like, how cool is that? The whole movie is just, it's cool. Like, cool in capital letters. The coolest movie I've watched in a long time. So rewatchable. I've already watched it 3 or 4 times at home. And I can't recommend it enough if you haven't experienced it yet. Wish I had a chance to see it in theaters. Wasn't in the cards for me this year with the young family and 2 kids and kid on the way, but just such an amazing movie. So that's it. Long video there, but that's my favorite movie from each year that I was born. From 1992, when I was born in November, all the way up until 2022, this most recent year. So hopefully I gave you some recommendations, some movies to watch, gave you a little insight into what I like, which I think is always interesting. I talk a lot about physical media and do reviews of like video quality and audio quality, but you don't always get that view into like what movies do I actually enjoy and like. So that gave you a little bit of this. You get a little feel for my taste. I'd love to hear your lists. If you guys want to make a video like this, I'm sure that Have You Seen, their YouTube channel would certainly not mind. This would be a cool little trend for other creators to go out and do, or even just leave it in the comments. Break it down. Leave us a list of the movies from each year that you've been around, and it's a great way to get to know people. Just discover their taste in movies. So hopefully this helped you get to know me a little bit better in my childhood and my life. And I tried to touch on some stuff like that because it's a really cool, interesting topic. So check out Have You Seen on YouTube because they inspired this. This was their idea, or at least they shared it with me. I'm sure others have done it, but they did a cool job of it. And check them out for their inspiration. And thank you to them for letting me do this and borrow their concept. But hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want more videos on movies, everything home entertainment, physical media, Blu-ray collecting, all that fun stuff, make sure you subscribe here to the channel so you never miss one. Like this video so others will see it and we can spread the word. And of course, follow me on social media. All those links are in the description. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm everywhere, so come find me and say hi. But thank you all for sticking around to the end here. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you all. I really appreciate your support, and hopefully this was a fun and interesting and a little bit of a different video for the channel that you guys enjoyed. So if you want more like this, definitely let me know. But thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe and stay healthy out there, and I will talk to you all soon.